The rain had been steady all morning, more of a whisper than a storm, but enough to soak through the collar of my shirt as I walked from the parking lot to the lawyer's building. I didn't bring an umbrella, didn't think I'd need one. Honestly, I didn't think I'd need to be here at all. My wife's family had handled everything after she passed, quick, cold, and without me. They planned the funeral, picked the casket, chose the songs, and closed the door on me like I'd been nothing more than a roommate. I wasn't even told about the will reading. The envelope had arrived 3 days ago, no return address, just the name of the law firm stamped in blue. Formal. Final. 20 years of marriage, and all I got was a mailing address. The elevator creaked as it carried me to the 4th floor. My shoes left wet marks on the firm's polished wood floor. I nodded at the receptionist. She barely looked up. Mr. Henley's office smelled like leather and paper. Heavy books lined the walls, too many of them unread. He gestured for me to sit, but didn't bother with small talk. "I'll be brief," he said, adjusting his glasses. The man didn't flinch as he opened the file. "Your wife left a will. She named her parents as sole beneficiaries." I blinked. "Come again?" He slid a single page across the table. Everything, assets, accounts, the house, all of it to her parents. There was a buzzing in my ears. I picked up the document, rereading the names, the legalese, the date. My name wasn't there, not even as a backup. "She didn't leave me anything?" My voice cracked in spite of myself. "She was very specific," Henley replied. "This version was finalized 2 months ago. It's legally binding." I sat back in the chair, the weight of 2 decades pressing down like soaked concrete. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I just sat there trying to figure out how someone who once held my hand in the dark could erase me with a signature. After the reading, people filed out. Her brother nodded politely. Her aunt didn't even look at me. And then I was alone in that room, staring at the empty leather chair across from me. I flipped back to the last page of the will. Her signature was flawless, calm, decisive. She must have signed it in that same room, 2 months ago, 2 months before she died. She wasn't sick. She hadn't said goodbye. She went to sleep and never woke up. At least that's what they told me. "She didn't even look me in the eye that last week," I whispered. I gripped the arms of the chair hard enough that the leather creaked. Her mother had been visiting more often. At the time, I thought it was support. Now, I wasn't sure. I closed my eyes, letting the silence settle. Then came the voice of my old mentor, words I hadn't thought about in years. "Don't confuse silence with peace." I stood up, slower than I meant to, knees stiff. I walked to the shelf and took the second copy of the will Henley had left behind, folded it, slipped it into my coat pocket. Then I called Greg, an old friend who handled accounting for both of us back when we filed taxes jointly. I asked if she'd mentioned any debts, any financial problems. He hesitated, then said no. Everything was in order. Clean. That was worse. I started thinking back, every trip she took to see her mother, every dinner I ate alone, every account she handled because it's easier that way. I remembered her favorite saying when I'd ask about money, "What's mine is yours." Apparently that stopped being true when the ink dried. I looked again at her signature, steady, confident. No hesitation, no remorse. The elevator was empty when I stepped in. I hit the button for the lobby, but the doors didn't close right away. Before they did, someone stepped in, her mother. She didn't meet my eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't even nod. "It's what she wanted," she whispered, eyes forward. There was no grief in her voice, just certainty. As the elevator descended, I looked at her profile, cold, composed, like this had been rehearsed. I stepped out into the rain, letting it soak my face. This wasn't just a will, it was a message. The drive home was quiet, not the peaceful kind, just quiet in the way a house feels after the last guest leaves and all you're left with is the mess. I pulled into the driveway like I had 1,000 times before, but this time it felt like someone else's house. Same mailbox, same overgrown bushes. But it didn't belong to me anymore. Not really. When I stepped inside, the scent of her lavender candles still lingered. The kitchen looked untouched. Her recipe cards were stacked beside the stove. Coffee mugs we'd collected over the years hung on their hooks, waiting. The fridge hummed, unaware of the new reality. I dropped my keys on the counter, and they landed next to a torn grocery list. Eggs, paper towels, almond milk, her handwriting. I stood there staring at it like it might tell me something. Maybe why. Maybe how. Her handwriting outlived her affection. I spent the rest of the day trying not to think, which is harder than it sounds. I made coffee just to hear something boil, fed the dog even though she wasn't there to remind me. Around noon, I picked up the phone and called her parents. It rang 6 times, then voicemail. I left a message, cordial, composed, just wanted to check in. I waited 2 hours, then called again. This time, I didn't leave a message. Later, I tried her sister, straight to voicemail. No callbacks, nothing. Even Mr. Henley stopped responding to emails after a brief. Everything was reviewed per Texas code. Legal. Final. By the 3rd day, I noticed something else. Our neighbors, the Browns, used to wave every morning when I got the paper. Now they just nodded. At church, no one asked how I was holding up. Not really. They said the words but didn't wait for answers. She left, but the silence stayed. That evening, I was sorting through a drawer looking for batteries when I saw the bank envelope. It had been buried under coupons and birthday cards. I recognized the logo right away, our old joint savings account. We hadn't used it in years. I opened the app and logged in. My stomach dropped. The account was empty, not low, empty. The withdrawal had happened 4 weeks before she died. $23,000 transferred to a bank I didn't recognize. I called the bank. They confirmed it was her doing. Full authorization. The destination account was in her maiden name, not our name. She'd been planning this, at least longer than I realized. I drove to the gas station around the corner later that night. Needed air. As I was filling up, I saw Margie, her best friend since college, at the next pump. "Hey," I said. She jumped a little, then forced a smile. "Hey." We chatted, or tried to. Nothing landed right. Her words were clipped. Her eyes didn't settle. "She didn't want to leave, like that," Margie said suddenly. "Like what?" But she backed off. "Never mind." I shouldn't have said that. I watched her drive away without finishing the tank. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake it. I kept seeing my wife at the kitchen table, laptop open, pretending to read news. But when I'd walk by, she'd switch tabs. Once, I caught her deleting her browser history. I didn't think much of it. Everyone has their secrets. But now I wondered if her secrets had an agenda. It wasn't grief that kept me up that night. It was the weight of pretending she loved me the way I loved her. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where she used to fold laundry, and tried to think logically. Maybe she was protecting me. Maybe the money was going somewhere safe. Maybe there were taxes I didn't know about. Then I heard myself and stopped. No, enough. I've spent my whole life making excuses for other people's cruelty. I'm not doing it anymore. I looked at a framed photo still hanging on the hallway wall. Thanksgiving, 4 years ago. She's laughing. And her parents are smiling. Even the dog looks happy. I'm the only one not smiling. I grabbed an old notebook from the junk drawer and started writing. Not poetry, not letters, just facts. The things I knew. The things I was finding out. Not for anyone else, for me, so I wouldn't forget how it all really happened. Around midnight, I was putting dishes away when I noticed one of her old cookbooks sticking out from the shelf. It had always been crooked. She used it more than the others. When I pulled it down, something shifted inside. Taped to the inside cover was an envelope. My name, written in her handwriting. No stamp, no return address, just my name. I didn't open it. Not right away. I just stood there holding it, feeling the weight of everything she never said while she was alive. I didn't know it yet, but that letter was never meant to comfort me. I got home later than usual. I hadn't planned to be out so long, but driving aimlessly gave me space to breathe. The streets were empty, just headlights and reflections. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was still on. Same flicker in the bulb, same crack in the 3rd step. I went straight to the shelf, something pulling me back to that cookbook. Her favorite, battered cover, smudges on the dessert pages. I pulled it down like I was afraid it might break. When I opened it, the envelope was still there, taped gently to the inside cover. My name in her handwriting. It wasn't sealed. My fingers hesitated. "If I'm gone, I hope you understand." That was the first line. I sat down, the letter shaking slightly in my hands. She wrote about feeling unseen, how she always smiled through things she didn't agree with. She said her parents never liked me, something I'd always known but never fully accepted. Said they convinced her to change the will years ago, just in case. She didn't want to fight, didn't want lawyers, didn't want me to be angry at her family. Too late for that. She said she was sorry. Sorry for the silence. Sorry for the secrets. Sorry for not telling me about the money, about the changes. She admitted to fearing I'd contest the will, and that fear, she wrote, would have made things even uglier. Then there was a part I had to read 3 times to make sure I understood. She said, I wanted you to have something that mattered, but I gave it to my sister instead. I thought it might be safer that way. Safer. What kind of gift needed to be safer? I dropped the letter on the table and leaned back, my head resting against the wall. It was the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. My birthday, a few months back, she gave her sister a tiny box. I didn't ask questions. She always gave people gifts. But that ring, that was mine. I made it back when we couldn't afford anything fancy. Silver band, rough edges, but it was ours. She told me once, you don't need gifts, you just need peace. At the time, I believed her. Now I saw it for what it was. Just another step in her quiet exit. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the will. It was how many small lies had lined the path to this. That ring should have been in my drawer. The next day, I drove across town. Her sister's house hadn't changed. Garden gnome by the porch, wind chimes rustling. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again. Longer this time. Nothing. I slipped a note under the door. We need to talk. No yelling, no blame, just the truth. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, engine off. Her curtains were closed. Not a light flickered inside. I stared at that house, trying to decide if she was hiding or if she just didn't care enough to face me. By the time I got home, the sky was dark. The dog didn't even look up when I walked in. I took pictures of the letter, every page, every corner. I saved the metadata, then backed it up to 2 drives. Emailed it to myself. I wasn't going to let it disappear. Just as I was about to shut my phone off, it buzzed. 1 new text. No name. Don't dig too deep. I stared at the screen. My hand shook slightly. Then I deleted it. No reply. No reaction. Because if someone wanted me quiet, they picked the wrong man. I looked around my kitchen. Same floor tiles we picked out 10 years ago. Same table where she'd laugh over burnt toast. Same bookshelf that held her cookbook, still cracked open. But the envelope, it was gone. 4 days after the letter disappeared, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. Thick paper, gold trim, the kind of stationery that's too formal for grief. My name was printed, not handwritten, above the logo of Vale Caldwell, Attorneys at Law, not the same firm as before. Inside was a brief message. You are invited to discuss estate matters publicly in the interest of resolution. It was signed by Augie Vale, not Mr. Henley. That caught my eye. They'd finally broken the silence, and now they wanted a meeting. Not a phone call, not a letter, but a face-to-face sit-down. My gut told me this wasn't about resolution. It was about control. Still, I showed up. Same office building downtown, same elevator, same polished floors that echoed footsteps like accusations. But this time I wasn't just confused, I was watching, listening, remembering. The conference room was colder than I remembered. Augie Vale sat at the far end of the table. Neat suit, steepled fingers. To his left, my mother-in-law. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Her husband sat beside her, as unreadable as ever. Thank you for coming, Augie said. I nodded but didn't speak. Let them talk first. We wanted to clarify a few outstanding issues regarding Rowena's estate, he continued. There have been questions and misunderstandings. We'd like to resolve them civilly. His voice was warm, but artificial, too measured. I'd seen more sincerity in car salesmen. I looked at her parents, still no emotion, just posture. He slid a folder toward me. Inside were letters of engagement, authorization forms, signatures, my wife's handwriting, clear, unmistakable. These confirm that Rowena retained our services privately over a year ago, he explained. All instructions were reviewed thoroughly and executed with her full consent. I flipped through the documents, some dated back to 15 months before she died. I looked up. So, you've been handling her affairs while I slept next to her every night? She wished to keep the process simple, he said, and private. And you thought not telling her husband was the definition of private. He didn't blink. Her decisions were entirely hers. You were not listed as a co-client. I set the folder down and stared at him. The mask of professionalism never slipped. But behind his glasses, I saw calculation, not neutrality. They weren't just lawyers. They were part of this. They'd helped her craft the silence. And what's this really about? I asked, folding my arms. You finally call me in after weeks of avoiding me. Why? Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Then Augie leaned forward, voice lower. You must understand, any continued attempts to dispute the terms may not reflect well. Not just for the estate, but for Rowena's memory, for the family's standing. It was subtle, but it was a warning. I leaned back in my chair. Don't talk to me about reputation. Your daughter died leaving a man with nothing but questions. That's not legacy, that's abandonment. They didn't respond, didn't argue, they just waited. I stared at all three of them. Something inside me hardened, not with rage, but with purpose. They wanted me to back off. They were counting on me to stay quiet, to play nice for the sake of appearances. But I wasn't that man anymore. Back home, I stared at the letter's scanned images again. I ran through every conversation I'd had with her family in the past year. Every lie passed off as politeness. Every secret buried in civility. That meeting wasn't for my benefit. It was damage control. And they'd shown their hand too early. As I packed up the documents into my own folder, ready to start building my case, I noticed something across the table before leaving the conference room. A blue folder. Thin. Out of place. Its label was barely visible. Supplemental amendment. It hadn't been handed to me. It hadn't been mentioned. But it was there, just enough in view to catch my eye. I paused. And I knew someone had left it for me to see. I laid the contents of the blue folder out on the kitchen table like I was prepping evidence for a trial. The edges of the paper curled slightly, and my hands hovered over them, not quite touching yet. My heart beat heavy in my ears. The document titled Supplemental Amendment looked innocent at first glance, just another legal page with stiff language and official formatting. But underneath, in her handwriting, were things they never meant for me to see. Notes scribbled in the margins, questions she'd asked herself, then a section where she'd written my name beside a property, then slashed it out in red ink. Not a mistake, a decision. But the date didn't match the one filed in court. It came after, days after. That was the part they didn't count on anyone finding. I started photographing every page, front and back, zooming in on the corners, capturing every word. I didn't know what it would lead to, but my gut told me this wasn't over. By the next morning, I was in the county records office. Place hadn't changed in years, same faded paint, same stale air. The clerk behind the glass window was older, her glasses low on her nose, eyes watching me as I slid the document toward her. She flipped through it like she already knew what she'd find. You're not the first to be misled by that firm, she muttered, voice low enough to pass under the radar. I leaned in. What do you mean by misled? I asked. She looked around, took a breath, then scribbled something on a post-it and passed it through the slot. LR, it read, no other details. She whispered, don't let this go. People need to know. I folded the note into my pocket, didn't say thank you, just nodded and walked out. The sun outside was too bright. I squinted, but I didn't stop. That evening I drove to her parents' house. I didn't call ahead. I wasn't there for pleasantries. They were out back, lounging by the pool like nothing had touched them, like their lives were still in neat little boxes. I parked by the curb, walked around the side, and stepped onto the back porch. You stole from me, I said, loud enough to cut through their laughter. But worse, you erased me. Her father looked over his shoulder and blinked like I was a bug in his wine. Her mother straightened up, lips parting but no words coming out. I stepped closer and let a copy of the amendment fall to the ground between them. Let the silence stretch. Her mother stood slowly, hands trembling. You were never right for her, she said, like that was justification for everything. I looked her dead in the eye. But she still loved me, and you buried her truth. Her father moved fast, bent down to grab the papers. I caught them first, pulled them back. You'll see these again, in court. His face twisted. You keep pushing this, and you won't just lose the house, he started. I didn't flinch. My phone was already recording, tucked safely in my coat pocket. I didn't need him to finish the threat. I turned and walked off, the paper still in my hand. I didn't look back. Not because I was done, but because it was just starting. Back at the house, I tossed the coat onto the chair and plugged in my phone. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the sky dim. The text came through just after 8. An unknown number. I saw what you did. You're not alone. It was signed LR. I sat down slowly, stared at the screen, then picked up the blue folder again. In the margins of one of the pages, same initials, same handwriting. She'd been keeping tabs longer than I had, maybe even protecting this from the inside. I was about to head upstairs when the knock came. Just one. Quick. I opened the door to nothing but dark air and a single envelope on the porch floor. I didn't need to guess where it came from. It was the same kind as the one hidden in the cookbook. Inside, one line written in ink that had faded with time. You weren't supposed to find this. I woke before sunrise. The house was hushed. I sat at the edge of the bed and laid out every document I had, the amendment proofs, the emails, the photos from the folder. I poured a strong cup of coffee and felt its warmth settle in my chest. No more hesitation. I drafted a demand letter, firm, direct, laying out what I wanted. Access to all her financial records, reversal of transfers, a public acknowledgement. I called Reese, my friend from college who knew a thing or two about data security, asked him to back up everything I had and hold copies off-site. I felt the tension creeping up my spine, but I steadied it. Today marks the move. I drove into town and entered the county courthouse records office. Same grand columns, same quiet halls. I presented my request. I wanted the full history of all properties transferred in her name in the past 2 years. The clerk, the same one or someone like her, looked uneasy. She pulled up records, deeds that had been changed, names that had shifted, properties that went from our joint trust to her name alone, one after another. I snapped photos, grabbed timestamps, locked copies. A property that was ours, titled jointly, had quietly been re-registered under her maiden name weeks before her death. I whispered to myself, "This is it." The clerk looked at me and muttered, "This happens more often than you think." I felt vindicated, but also shocked. With discrepancies in hand, I moved to the marriage contract file. The contract we signed years ago, supposedly ironclad, was declared void. Not by a court, but by a notation. Clerical error in notarization. The version the family used was a backdated copy, invalid under state law. They'd built their house of lies on a forged foundation. Betrayal didn't feel enough. I whispered, "They forged the foundation to steal the rest." My anger was coiled, ready to snap. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. A voice, cold, distant, said, "Stop digging or you'll regret it." I held the line, recorded it. I traced the call. It led to a VoIP line masked as part of the family's law network. This wasn't just about a will. It was about manipulation, deception. My chest tightened, but I refused to flinch. I messaged Augie Vale, asked if he had contacts who might help. I emailed Verity Quinn, the reporter I'd tentatively contacted before. "I may have something big. Let's talk." I told Reese to prep redacted proof I could share publicly if needed. I laid out a strategy in my head. Start small, leak what needs to be seen, counterattacks with evidence, not noise. I felt less alone. I felt power stirring. Just as I shut off my laptop and reached for my coat, there was a knock. A legal courier stood at my door. He handed me a sealed envelope, the family's lawyer, a court summons. They were forcing me into battle. I didn't want to go, but the invitation had been public, and avoiding it would have given them a headline I didn't want written. So I went. The Bascom estate was lit up like a postcard. Twinkling garden lights, string quartets humming through clipped hedges. The kind of event where everyone knows each other's grandfather and everyone's smile hides a secret. I arrived alone, coat folded over my arm, papers left behind for once. Her parents greeted me with stiff faces, not fake, not warm, just tolerated. She wasn't there. That mattered less than I expected. As I moved through the crowd, the air felt weighted. Small glances. Half conversations stopped mid-sentence. I wasn't paranoid, I was present. I stood by the fountain, letting myself breathe. Then came the first sting. A woman I recognized from some gala years ago leaned toward her friend but spoke just loud enough for me to hear. That man, he's just her accounts clerk now, nothing more. A waiter, a kid barely 20, accidentally knocked a glass of wine onto the flagstone right near my shoe. Oops, he said. Then a civic leader I once helped draft funding proposals with approached me. You must understand, she belonged to this family long ago. I smiled, nodded, didn't blink. Inside I was measuring each word, each jab. Not because I cared about them, but because I needed to remember who said what and how public they made it. I walked the garden path slowly, shoes crunching gravel, heat simmering just below my collarbone. Then it escalated. The host, a slick silver-haired man who married into the Bascom bloodline, stepped on stage under the canopy. He raised a flute of champagne and smiled like he'd just won something. We're gathered tonight to honor the generous heart of our dear Rowena, he said. Her family's loyal supporters have shown grace, dignity, and discretion. He scanned the crowd. His pause was calculated, and it's always tragic when outsiders try to assume roles that never belong to them. The music died for a moment. People didn't gasp. They just shifted, like trying to get comfortable with discomfort. I felt the silence wrap around me. I stood, my hands clenched. I stepped forward, mouth ready to fire, but the microphone was off. He looked down at me just slightly. Enough. He knew, and I knew he knew. Later, out near the roses, I caught him alone. You think I'm a nobody? Watch carefully, I said. He chuckled, flat. You're lucky they let you in. I leaned in just enough for only him to hear. I built more of this place than half your family even remembers. You should thank me for keeping it standing. He didn't laugh that time. A few guests looked over, curious. He turned his head, walked off. I needed space. I drifted toward the back edge of the garden, heart still hammering. That's when Reese found me. Quietly, calmly, he slipped his phone into my palm. Got the whole speech, he said. Video, time-stamped, live mic, full crowd, yours to use. I stared at the screen. There it was. Proof, not just of what he said, but how they all sat with it. No one stopped him. No one corrected the record. For the first time in a while, I felt control land back in my hands. I could slice back, not out of vengeance, out of necessity. As I turned to leave, I glanced at my phone. A headline flashed on the screen. Scandal erupts, charity gala speech omits widower's name. I walked into the courtroom with 2 heavy binders in hand. The hall felt colder today, the light harsher. I took a breath as I passed through security, reminding myself, evidence is truth, not vengeance. Augie Vale and the Bascom family sat ahead, stiff backs and wary faces, as if they sensed the turn. The judge called the session to order. I asked for a motion, new evidence to be admitted. There was a pause. The judge nodded. I opened the first binder and laid out the supplemental amendment alongside the original contract we signed years ago. For the first time publicly, both documents faced each other. The court murmured. Augie's jaw tightened. I read aloud the original deed, signed by Rowena then, naming me as the owner of the house before any amendments. Gasps rippled across the gallery. Their attorney rose to object, but I already anticipated that move. My motion had precedence. Silence fell. Next, I presented side-by-side copies of property deeds. The first version showed the home under our joint ownership. The later one listed her name only, transferred months before her passing. I displayed metadata, timestamp records, even file creation logs alongside handwriting comparison charts. Each was detailed. Every margin showed what changed, when, and by whom. The crowd shifted. A few eyebrows raised. This wasn't speculation. This was precise. The deed I had paid for, the home I made payments on, it had been quietly reflagged in her name alone. The tension in the courtroom climbed. Then I launched the financial trail. I projected slides showing large transfers from our joint account into shell accounts tied to her maiden name. Money I earned, moved quietly, used to renovate properties under her family's identity. The screen lit up with graphs, dates, bank logs. Opposing counsel sat rigid, unable to speak. The courtroom gasped. Righteousness filled my chest. Truth was no longer hidden. Gertrude's face went pale. Leland stuttered over a question. Augie stood, trying to clear his throat, protest, but the judge silenced him. I glanced at Rowena's portrait in the gallery, the one they kept in the corner of the courtroom. I felt her presence closer than ever. Reporters leaned forward, pens and cameras ready. The weight had shifted. In my closing, I didn't cry. I didn't demand vengeance. I spoke calmly, clearly. I come here not for anger, but for justice. Truth is the only inheritance no one can steal. I offered to drop certain claims, but not the truth. The courtroom held its breath. The judge nodded slowly. As the judge stood to recess before ruling, I rose and walked into the hallway. Reporters swarmed. A hand tapped my shoulder. I turned. LR stood there, eyes steady. "You're not done yet," she said softly. The judge entered the room without ceremony, no gavel, no theatrics, just quiet authority. He read the ruling straight, no eye contact with either party. Portions of the estate were restored. The fraudulent deeds were voided. My name was officially reinstated on property titles that had been stripped from me in silence. No criminal charges, but the court recognized emotional damages and breach of trust. That was all I needed. Augie Vale didn't speak. He walked out through the back exit like someone who'd been uninvited to his own lie. I watched him go without satisfaction, only closure. A few days later, I loaded up my truck and drove north to the cabin. The one Rowena had quietly deeded back to me before everything fell apart. She hadn't told a soul. Maybe she thought it was a peace offering. Maybe guilt. I didn't care. The road twisted through leaf-bare trees, golden oak carpeting the sides. Late autumn air cut through the windows, crisp, bracing. I didn't bring much, just warm clothes, coffee, and 2 boxes of documents I had no more reason to carry. When I arrived, I stacked firewood, lit the hearth, and let the silence fall. I stood in front of the glass doors, watched smoke drift upward, and for the first time, didn't feel like I had to defend myself. I fought not for her money, but for my dignity. And I won. That night, I sat at the dining table with my old laptop. I wrote a letter to her daughter, my stepdaughter from her first marriage. We hadn't spoken in years. Too much hurt, too much noise. I attached scanned court records, proof of what had been done. But more than that, I wrote the truth. Not about Rowena, but about how I tried to protect what we built. Days passed. I didn't expect a reply, but one came. "I'm proud of what you did. I knew something wasn't right. Thank you for saying it out loud." Her words landed softer than any ruling. Weeks went by. I drafted a new living trust from scratch, every page signed, witnessed, notarized. Nothing would be left to ambiguity, no silence for others to weaponize. I designated part of the estate for a legal fund supporting women navigating abusive divorces. Not because of what Rowena did, but because I saw how messy truth becomes when power is unchecked. If you don't write your own ending, someone else will. On the last morning at the cabin, I sat by the lake with a framed photo of Rowena and me from the early years. We were happy then, laughing about something I can't remember. I held it gently. I no longer needed to ask why she made the choices she did. The truth didn't undo the damage, but it let me breathe again. Sometimes justice isn't loud, it's just quiet, resolute, final. As I packed my things, I paused at the desk. My memoir, written under a pen name, had gone live weeks earlier on a retirement blog. I hadn't told anyone, but now I saw the numbers climbing. People were reading, people were sharing, not gossip, not scandal, just truth, ordinary, unvarnished, necessary. I closed the laptop, leaned back in the chair, and whispered to the empty room, "Let them read. I'm done living in silence."